Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. My name is Rajat Sadana. I'm one of the three co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be a main host today. Supporting us in this webinar, we have Sandeep. Sandeep is a GMAT strategy expert, and he's been with e-GMAT for upwards of 4 years. In this webinar, we're going to talk about pre-thinking. Pre-thinking is a way to come up with assumptions, or in this context, in the context of this webinar, come up with assumptions before you start looking at the answer choices. It's one of the most important core skills that that you need if you want to excel in GMAT critical reasoning. It's a skill that we apply across all argument-based questions, whether it's assumptions, evaluate, strengthen, weaken, logically complete, or in fact even bold-faced questions. And so overall, this webinar is a very application focused webinar. It is a heavy webinar. It'll require that that you are that you stay on your toes, that you ask lots and lots of good questions. To make sure that you're well prepared for this webinar, we did send a few video lessons your way. This one video lesson, which is Introduction to Assumption, is probably the most critical video lesson that you should have gone through it. If you've gone through this, you are ready for this webinar. If you've not gone through this video lesson is a part of your free trial. So post the session, go log into e-GMAT.com. If you're a free trial student or if you're not a paid student, you'd be able to navigate to this video lesson, and that way you'd complete your learning when it comes to pre-thinking for assumptions. We also have a couple of other video lessons in logical gap and two entities. These are essentially various argument types through which we demonstrate how to apply pre-thinking. And then for those of you who are worried about bold-faced questions, we do have a few video lessons for the same as well. Let me hide this. We have some upcoming free webinars. We have a quant workshop, which we are hosting tomorrow. Again, 24 hours from now. And for those of you who have not registered for that, you guys can do that. Then for those of you who are looking for a high GMAT score, we have a GMAT strategy webinar in which we talk about how do you go from 500 to a 730, a 600 to a 760, and so on and so forth. So that's a week from now. Again, I think one of our most heavily attended webinars. So with that, I have upwards of 100 students here in the webinar. Let's get to know you guys a bit better. So let's kind of figure out when do you plan to take the test and what is your target GMAT score. Okay, given this particular group, what I can see is that most of you have not taken a date as of, or rather, the biggest group over here has not taken a date as of yet. That's about, actually, it's 46 to 75, and that is almost similar. My apologies. So yeah, two similarly sized groups over here, those who have their exam in 46 to 75 days and those who haven't taken a date as of yet. In addition to that, we have actually three other similarly sized groups, those who have their exam right away, those who have between 16 and 30, and those who have between a month and 45 days. One of the things that I always believe in is that the less time you have, the more planned, the more deterministic you need to be. So if you are in that group where you have the next 15 days, make sure you know exactly what you need to do to get to that target GMAT score within the next 15 days or so. Okay, then let's get to your target GMAT scores over here. 730 to 750, the biggest group over here, that's about 35% of you. 710, 720, that's another 27%. Very similar to that, those who are aiming for that 760 or higher score, and about 16% of you are in that 600 to 700 bracket. Okay, with that, let's go right into the presentation pane. As I go into the presentation pane, the screen will have or will be in the process of changing for you. Once the screen settles down, you should be able to see a presentation, a slide which says a CR1 pre-thinking for assumptions. If you can see that slide, select yes. All right, a majority of you can see that slide. That's wonderful. Okay, that's good. But 96% of you can see the slide. All right, that's really great. So essentially, there are three parts to this webinar. In the first part, we're going to talk a bit about your MB and your study plan. That's going to be over here. I'm going to spend about 6 minutes on that. Then we'll go right into the core of this webinar, which is how to pre-think assumptions. And then during this webinar, we get lots and lots of students, and they have questions which are a bit more personal to their preparation. So I do reserve about 20 minutes towards the end to discuss such questions. Okay, so earlier in the webinar, I talked about even if you have 15 days before your preparation, you should make sure that you know what to do and how it's going to help you. And so essentially at e-GMAT, we're all about personalizing the learning to your needs so that you get the most out of it, and which is where our architecture of learning is slightly different than the architecture of learning that other companies offer. Most people are built on this book-based architecture where you go through a standard set of content, you don't get a whole lot of feedback, and you go through it, you practice questions, some of you succeed, others don't. At e-GMAT, we are all about personalizing your learning right from the get-go and giving you feedback every 30 minutes of your learning, and that's kind of what I'm going to briefly demonstrate, and I want you guys to experience that, get a taste of it. So I'm going to demonstrate that using how do you build your study plan. So if you want to build your study plan, get to that score of 720 or higher, the way you go about doing this is, first of all, understand what do you need to do to get there. So create that path to your goal. That's kind of building your study plan, understanding your strengths, understanding your weaknesses, getting good estimates with regards to how much time you need to overcome those weaknesses. Once you know what are your weaknesses, then and you've attributed time, a certain time slot to work on those weaknesses, then you need to learn all the concepts that are needed. Now, merely knowing these concepts isn't enough. You need to know how to apply these concepts as well. And then you need to get so good at applying these concepts that you attain that level of mastery that puts you in the top 2, top 3 percentile of students worldwide. So how do you define that path? How do you get to this step number 1 over here? So, and we're going to take a case study of a student who wants to go from that 600 to that 720 score. And I'm sure many of you are around these 2 marks here. So how you go about doing this is, first, you figure out where you are. You quantify, and I want to use the word quantify your starting abilities, which is, hey, what are my abilities in sentence correction, critical reasoning, number properties, algebra, geometry? So there are a total of about 8 abilities that the GMAT measures. And you want to make sure that you get your starting scores in each of those 8 abilities. Once you have those, then you define milestones as to, where do you need to improve, to what extent, to get to that score of 720, 730. Now, once you have the starting abilities, once you have those milestones defined, that's when you personalize your learning. You focus on and say, this is what I'm going to do. To this extent, let's say, for example, if a good percentage of your verbal score improvement is to be driven by sentence correction, then you probably are going to spend more time on sentence correction than on reading comprehension. If it's the other way around, then the time spent should match that strategy. So how do you get your starting abilities? The first thing you do, the way you get your starting abilities, is to take a mock test that gives you your starting abilities. There are 2 ways to do it. One is you take the actual GMAT, the in-center GMAT, and get an ESR. That's about spending $280. The other way is to take a mock test, to take a Sigma X mock and do that. So so we do provide a free mock test that allows you to do this. Okay. Then the second thing is you set milestones. How do you set milestones? We have built a tool called PSP, or a personalized study planner. It's an AI-driven utility in which you put your starting abilities, and then it gives you your target milestones. So how does this work? It takes in your starting quant and starting verbal scores. In this case, this score amounts to a score of 600 overall. Then it spells out what should be a target quant and target verbal score. So this gives you an approximate estimate of what these scores need to be. Now, this is a starting point. Then it takes your starting abilities in quant. So here you have those quant abilities, arithmetic and algebra, geometry. For those of you who've taken the GMAT, have seen an enhanced score report, you know what this is. Actually, sorry, these are your target abilities. It spells out what should be your target abilities in quant, what should be your target abilities in verbal. Here again, you can see the verbal score is driven more by SC ability than by RC ability. So consequently, the time spent in SC should be a bit higher. Now, taking into account your starting abilities, which is what you get from the sigma X mark, here you can see the starting ability of 15 SC, 51 in RC, and then taking into account the target abilities, it then spells out a study plan where it has these time estimates for each of these subsections. So and it really shows how your score will progressively improve. It gives you these milestones. It says if you hit these ability numbers, this is how you go from 600 to, let's say, a 630, 630 to a 670, and so on and so forth. Over here, again, we talked about the starting abilities and target milestones and time per subsection over here. Then it tells you, it takes into account how much time you can put in. So you can really say, I'm going to study about 2 hours a day on a weekday, 5 hours a day on a weekend, and it spells out a day-by-day plan as well. We created this AI-driven utility so that each one of you can go and create that personalized study plan. We have some upcoming slots available in which you can book and work with a certified mentor to help create that personalized study plan. So if you click on that GMAT study plan over here, it'll take you there. If you want to take a sigma X mark, number 3 will help you get there. Okay, and we've had many students get to this. Here are some examples which you can see on our YouTube channel. We have upwards of about, I think, 141 or so interviews on our YouTube channel at this particular time. Also, do connect with me on LinkedIn. If you search for Rajat Sadana on LinkedIn, you should be able to connect with me. We post about 5 articles every week on GMAT and MBA on LinkedIn. You can also connect with upwards of 16,000 students who are studying at top B schools. Okay. With that, let's get to the core of this webinar, which is how do you pre-think assumptions? So how will we go about doing this? So in this webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss your current approach, which is, hey, how do you go about solving assumption questions today? Then we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise. This part 2 is where we're going to build that skill of pre-thinking. And then part 3 is where we're going to apply that skill of pre-thinking. And post this webinar, I'm going to give you again the link to those free trial files or tell you what you should do with those free trial files so that you can continue building on that skill. Okay, so at a very high level, we're going to document how you prepare today. We're going to then recognize what's important to master critical reasoning, and then we're going to put you on that path to success over here. So there are 2 ways in which people approach critical reasoning today, and I'm going to talk about both these methodologies on the following slide. But before that, let me talk about what pre-thinking is. Pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in about 15 seconds before you look at your answer choices. There are a couple of definitions that I'm going to ask you to write down. I'm going to give you this presentation, but to make sure that you apply this during the session, this is one of those definitions that I want to make sure that you write down. So you want to, when you look at an argument, you want to think of one potential good assumption. An argument can have multiple assumptions, so we're only worried about getting that one potential assumption. You want to do this in your mind, and you want to, once you become a skilled pre-thinker, you'd be able to do this in about 15 seconds. Now, the key thing is you've got to do this before your brain's corrupted with the extra information that answer choices provide. So it's really critical that you do that. So doing pre-thinking does require a bit of mental resilience because as a test taker, we are always tempted to look at the answer choices. You're always tempted to get done with the question. You've got to resist that temptation. Now, the reason why we want to define this that precisely is because even though this terms existed for quite some time, we never had a framework. A framework to apply this term did not exist. And we were the first company to come up with this framework to define it in this precise manner. In fact, most experts often consider pre-thinking as predicting the answer. No, pre-thinking is not about predicting the answer. We're not here to spell out a prophecy. We are here to understand the author's logic. And so there's that group of experts who think pre-thinking is predicting the answer. There's this group of experts who actually go on the other side and say pre-thinking is like black magic. It is not black magic. It's a process which pretty much everyone can master if you put your brain to it. And it helps you get difficult questions right. It helps you save time on the test. Okay. With that, let's talk about, how do people approach assumption questions today? So there are two ways in which people approach assumption questions today. One is they read the argument, they go to the answer choices and do a back and forth. The second is they read the argument, they pause, they pre-think an assumption, and then go to the answer choices. They come back to the argument only if they need to refer to something, otherwise not. So which methodology do you use? If I can get a response. Okay, let's get a few more responses. I have about 70 odd responses. Let's get a few more. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. So about 45% if you use the, I call this the back and forth methodology over here, and about 55% if you use the pre-thinking approach. So my goal in this webinar is those of you who do not follow pre-thinking, I want to give you a taste of pre-thinking. I want to motivate you guys that you follow pre-thinking, or you at least start to give pre-thinking a chance essentially. And for those of you who do follow pre-thinking, I want to make you guys better pre-thinkers. I want to fine-tune your approach towards pre-thinking. I want to make sure that that you understand if you're taking longer, where are you taking longer, what aspects do you need to work on. If you're struggling with a certain kind of arguments, I want to make sure that you understand where you're struggling and kind of remove that bottleneck for you. Okay. Now, pre-thinking is a process, and excelling on a process requires that you have certain skills and you build certain skills. And so I'm going to talk about the skills that we will focus on while we go through this argument. One of the most important skills on GMAT verbal, in fact, we use a skill in GMAT quant as well, is the ability to visualize. A lot of people, and you see this over here when you see people solving questions, they try to approach critical reasoning questions in a very mechanical fashion. They would read it, they'd say, okay, if X is there, then Y must be there. It's very mechanical. It works when it comes to easy and medium difficulty questions. It doesn't work when it comes to hard questions. And that's kind of what we'll focus on, because most of you want to get to that score of 670 or higher, which means you will solve an appreciable number of hard questions. So the first thing you want to do when you read a pre-thinking argument, an argument, is to visualize. And you visualize both the conclusion in your own words as well as the answer choices. So think of, as you read the conclusion, you want to be able to see that happening in your brain. This requires skill. This requires reading slowly. So the process of visualization is a process of slowing down so that you can do it quickly. If you slow down, you'd be able to visualize quickly, and you'd build a skill as you solve more and more questions. The second thing which we want to do is that we want to make sure that we understand the logic that the author uses. GMAT critical reasoning arguments are very logical. The author is a very logical person. He provides you with facts on which he builds his case. Understand what is the role that those facts are playing. What is the role that those intermediate claims are playing as the author arrives at the conclusion. And once you have a solid understanding of that logic, then this piece, which is piece number 3, formulation of the falsification question, we're going to talk about what that falsification question is. That becomes a very quick exercise. So we're going to focus on each of these 3 things during this webinar. And the first 3 examples, as I mentioned, we will talk about building these 3 skills. And the last 2 examples, which are really difficult official questions, we're going to use these skills. Okay, with that, let's solve a question, and a question that starts with understanding what an assumption is to begin with. I'm going to give you a very, very simple exercise, and I want you to tell me what is the assumption over here. So here's a short answer pod, and here is the question. So tell me, what do you think is the author's assumption here? You can write your answers in and press enter. The argument's there. Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, therefore he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. And during the webinar, I will be drinking water, so you'd hear some sound, so please excuse me on that. You need more than 500. Those who score 500 do not get admissions in an Ivy. 500 is a low score to secure admission in an Ivy League college. Ivy League college required. So perfect. You guys get it. So this is a context. This is a scenario which is very close to your heart. The reason you are here in this webinar, the reason why most of you are here is because this is what you want to do. So visualizing this is very, very simple. And then once you're able to visualize this, getting to the assumption becomes very easy, and which is what I want to demonstrate over here through the simple exercise. So what does the author really say? The author says, hey, Joe got a score of 500. The author doesn't qualify what that score is, but then he uses this keyword therefore, and he says because of this, therefore means because of this, he will not get admission in an Ivy League college over here. So from that score of 500, the author comes to this conclusion that Joe will not get an admission in an Ivy League college. So with that, what does this mean? What does the author assume? He says a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to this group over here, which is Ivy League colleges. Now, key thing that I want you to focus on, because you guys did most of it perfectly, is the fact that this is an essential piece over here. Why? Because the author's conclusion is about Joe. So that's why you have to really say someone like Joe. The author's conclusion is not about the Prince of Saudi Arabia or Clinton's daughter, but the author's conclusion is about Joe. So you've got to really mate that assumption to the conclusion over here. Now, with that, let's kind of try and understand what's the definition of an assumption. How do you define assumption? You guys are able to come up with it. So what is an assumption? What is an assumption? Why didn't you? I'm going to remove broadcast results. So type your answers in and press enter. And as you do that, I will get those answers. And once I get about 30 answers or so, I'm going to broadcast these results. Okay, I'm getting some really good answers here. 3, 2, and 1. And you can continue putting in your answers over here. Now, here we see a bit more variety. Our reason of a certain scenario, it is something like a precondition, a fact on which the conclusion is based. An assumption is something that is required to fill that gap. So some of these definitions, are what I call as, they're not as precise as they need to be, not as precise as the assumption that you guys came up with for the previous exercise. Some of them are really precise. You said a missing premise, that must be true. So a couple of you have said that. That's a very precise definition. That's an excellent definition. Okay. Something that you think is correct, not so much. It's everything that, an assumption is something that it has to be correct, but no, everything that you think that may be correct may not be an assumption. A couple of you actually say it's a missing link. Yes, every assumption is a missing link. Every missing link is not an assumption. So it's that necessary versus sufficient piece over here. So let's talk about what an assumption is. An assumption is an unstated idea, okay, that must be true. This must be true is critical for what? For the conclusion to be valid. And again, at e-GMAT, we're big about visualizing things. And so I'm going to really talk about what does this mean over here in the context of what we're trying to do. Okay, but before that, let's talk about two characteristics that an assumption satisfies. One is it provides new information. Where does it come from? This comes from the unstated idea aspect of it, and it satisfies that. The second thing is it satisfies that must be true condition, and we're going to focus a lot on this must be true condition in this session for what the conclusion to be valid. Now, this is the second piece, probably just I want you to write down three things. The first thing was what is pre-thinking. The second thing that I want you to write down is this definition of an assumption. It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. And the third thing that I want you to write down, which I'll tell you in about 15 minutes, is the pre-thinking question or the falsification question over here. So write this down. Why? Because when you're solving questions, there will be answer choices that will confuse you. If you have this definition in your mind, that's all that you would need to validate or invalidate that answer choice. Okay. Now, the correct choice will satisfy both these conditions. The incorrect choice will falter on either one or two. Okay. What does new info mean? That's a great question. New information means that it provides information that you can't infer from the argument. Okay. Or to be more precise, that you can't infer from the factual part of the argument. Okay. We'll see the last question that we do today. It'll have an answer choice which will satisfy this condition over here, but it won't satisfy this condition over here, or it would be information that you can infer from the argument. So hold on to that. Let's visualize what does must be true mean. So think about this argument as this house where the roof is this conclusion over here. Now you see this roof that is supported by three pillars. These three pillars are your premises. Okay. Each one of these three pillars is a supporting statement, which means that it makes this roof stronger. It helps keep the roof strong and upright. But only one of these pillars may be an essential pillar, which means that even if you remove this and you remove this, the roof might still remain upright. But if you remove this pillar, then the roof might cave in, or the roof will cave in. And this pillar is what that essential pillar is. Now, how many of you, while solving assumption questions, have felt that there are, two or three answer choices? Each one of them looked good enough to be an assumption. How many of you were confused and ended up choosing the wrong answer choice while solving assumption questions in the past? Okay, you have. So those answer choices, most of the times, those answer choices that confuse you, the reason they confuse you is because they provide excellent supporting statements, which means they're excellent strengtheners, but they don't satisfy the must be true criteria, and which is what we want to focus on to build our understanding on what constitutes must be true. Okay, so that's what an essential pillar is. So what does must be true mean? It means that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true, or in other words, the assumption needs to be there for the conclusion to remain valid, or for the conclusion not to be destroyed. That's something, if you keep in your mind, as you look at an answer choice, you will get to the correct answer choice, or you'd be able to validate or invalidate it every time. Okay. So let's kind of talk about what does falsification of conclusion really mean, or in what scenario, or how can the conclusion be destroyed? So let's take the same argument here. Simple argument. Here is your argument here. So what does destroying this conclusion mean? Destroying this conclusion means that if Joe gets admission into an Ivy League college with that score of 500, then that conclusion will be destroyed. Can everyone see that? That if this happens, then this conclusion will be destroyed, right? So how do you evaluate whether an answer choice is correct? How do you really say, hey, this satisfies that must be true condition? So let's take the same piece over here. A score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. This we said was our correct assumption. So let's kind of do the must be true test on it. Let's ask this question: will Joe get admission, or will the conclusion be destroyed if the statement to the left no longer holds true? So here is something that you need to know. I want to slow down over here. If you say that a statement no longer holds true, then by definition, what you're also saying that its negated version holds true. And I'm going to explain this later on. But if you're saying that a statement is not true, then what you're saying is its negated version is true. So what it means is, if you're saying that this thing is not true, then what you're saying is that this thing over here is true, which means the score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, if this happens, does my conclusion break down? Yes, absolutely. If this score becomes acceptable, then the author can't be 100% certain that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. So that's what we call as testing, or applying the negation test, or this is what we call as testing the must be true aspect of a statement. Which statement did we test the must be true aspect of? This particular statement. And we really said, hey, let's negate this and see what happens to the conclusion. Does the conclusion break down? Yes, it does. This means this satisfies the must be true test. Just clear with regards to, okay, how do we look at must be true? Yes, no, you can type in your answers here. All right, most of you are. Now some of you may be saying, how can you say that if you look at a statement and you say, if this is not true, how is it that the negated version automatically becomes true? Some of you may be wondering. Let's kind of take some examples to prove that. Okay, let's take an example. Say Harvard has the best MBA program. If you say that's not true, then what you're really saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or an MBA program better than or just as good as Harvard exists. Is that clear? Is that clear, right? If you're saying this statement is not true, what you are also saying is that this is true. So in a sense, what you're saying is that the negated version is true. Okay, so that's where every statement has two sides. Either you believe that to be true, or you believe it to be not true, which means you believe the negated version to be true. Okay, John runs faster than David. If you say that's not true, what it really means is that David is just as fast as John, or David is faster than John. Again, if you say this statement is not true, you are implicitly also saying that this is true. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect. And then as we go there, a few of you would get it right away. There would be some who won't get it right away. So stay on, and by the second or the third question, most of you, about 95% of you will get it. Okay. So where does that must be true come from? It comes from that very definition of assumption, which is an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Now let's look at the other side of it, which is that if the answer choice is an incorrect answer choice, if the answer choice is one of those answer choices that has been put there to confuse you, and if you know your stuff, then what you're going to find is that essentially the conclusion will not break down in the presence of the negated instance of that answer choice. So it works the other way as well. For incorrect answer choices, you will see the conclusion stays intact. Let's take the same example, same argument, and the statement that we're going to evaluate is a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. That's what we want to really just say this. So let's say, is that a must be true statement? And so which means that will the conclusion, we asked exactly the same question. Will the conclusion become invalid? Will Joe get admission if this is no longer true? Okay, so if this is no longer true, then its negated instance becomes true, and its negated instance is that a score of 500 on the GMAT becomes a good score. If that becomes true, then you really say, hey, will Joe get admission? Does my conclusion break down? The answer is not really. Why? Because in this argument over here, the answer is not predicated on whether a score of 500 is considered a good or a bad score. The author is saying, hey, Joe, you scored 500 on the GMAT, therefore, Joe is not going to get admission in an Ivy League college. Or in other words, you swap 500 by 700, the argument would still remain the same. The logic of the argument doesn't change. It's not built on, dependent on how you qualify the score of 500. Okay, is that clear? And this would be an answer choice that they will put it in the incorrect answer choices over there. Now this seems simplistic, but we're going to use exactly this logic to solve the most challenging questions out there. Okay, I have put in another one over here, but so again, the three skills that we want to focus on that we do this is to visualize the conclusion in our own words and to visualize the statement. So we looked at two answer choices, one correct, one incorrect. We visualize each one of these answer choices. Because we could visualize them, we could actually create the negated versions. Then we want to use the logic that the author uses and build that falsification question. Now with that, we get into the second part of this webinar where you're going to learn how to pre-think on more complex arguments. But just as a takeaway, for the correct answer choice, if you get a correct answer choice, apply the negation test, or you negate it, you'd find that the negated version breaks the conclusion. For the incorrect answer choice, the conclusion stays intact even in the presence of the negated version of that answer choice. Just remember this as a baseline. So with that, let's do a pre-thinking exercise. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you an argument, a more sophisticated argument. You're going to read that argument, you're going to put in your pre-thinking. You will not get any answer choices. So this is what we call as a purist approach over here. You get the argument, you put in your pre-thinking,
And then to do that, I want you to break down the argument and understand what the conclusion is. Visualize the conclusion. I'm going to give you ample time to do this. Okay. Then we're going to look at what is it that you put in the short answer part on the right. And then I'm going to go about doing pre-thinking the way we do at e-GMAT. So at this point, you understand what an assumption is. So we're going to push forward towards understanding what pre-thinking is. And then we're going to evaluate these submissions. Okay. So with that, I'm going to clear the short answer pod. I'm going to remove broadcast results so that your responses are not influenced by what others are putting in. Make sure you have a pen and paper because this is the first time you're doing this pre-thinking. I want you to be able to write things down because it helps you visualize. Okay. With that, let's get started. Here is the argument. You have to tell me what does the author assume over here. And I'm going to mute myself for about 2.5 minutes. So you have ample time. Go slow. Okay, guys, last 10 seconds. Get those answers in. And Mansi, if you could put that answer in the pod on the right, not in the Q&A pod, that'd be wonderful. 3, 2. The question is, what does the author assume here? 3, 2, and 1. Let me broadcast the results so you guys can see. Okay. One says, since tenured professors are focused more on research, they don't put much emphasis on teaching. Tenured focuses faculties are better researchers than teachers. The reward system of full-time lecturers puts more emphasis on teaching and enhances less student learning than tenured professors do. So an answer that's going in the direction that I like. The reward for system of full-time professors is better than tenured. Okay. You're talking about the right thing, even though it's kind of not the most, it's not the precise assumption that I'm looking for. Um, Tenured professors focus more on research. There are no other factors that influence professors to enhance student learning than the reward system in tenured professors. So, okay, this is an answer which logically it's correct. It's not an answer that you're going to see on the test. It's just a generic principle for a causal argument, which is all you're saying is this, there is no alternate cause over here. So good. I'm really glad that so many of you attempted to, put your brains on this, which means you read the argument over here. So let's see how we go about getting to the answer. Some of you have gotten very close to the correct answer. Others have not gotten close to the issue at hand. So let's kind of look at this. The first thing I want you to tell me is which statement over here is the main conclusion, and I'm going to put a poll question here. So how we're going to do is we're going to first isolate the conclusion in this argument. Why? Because we've got to figure out what that conclusion is before we visualize it. Then we're going to understand the logic that the author uses, and then we're going to ask this pre-thinking question, which once we know this, once we end this, then essentially step 3 becomes very easy and assumptions start to come right to us. So how do you go about this? What is this falsification question, or what is this falsification method? Let's kind of think about it. What's an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. That's our basic definition of what an assumption is. If you were to infer from this definition, what it means is that without the assumption, there are places or there are ways to break the conclusion down, right? So if an assumption prevents the conclusion from breaking down, which means that it should be built around those scenarios where the conclusion breaks down. Why? Because if you were to build that pillar in a house, and if this were to be that essential pillar, you would figure out, hey, where is my roof caving in, which is my conclusion, and you're going to put a pillar over there. Okay. So to figure out where assumptions are, you've got to figure out where is it that my conclusion's breaking down. And once you figure that out, you just put that pillar over there. So find out those scenarios where your conclusion breaks down, and then the assumptions are simply that those scenarios don't happen. You just put that pillar over there. Does that make sense? Okay, that's kind of the only thing that you need other than that definition of assumption over here. So, but 80% of you get it. The other 17%, or let's get a few more yeses and nos over here. The goal of an assumption is to make sure that the conclusion stays valid. That's number one, which means that if the assumption is not there, if that pillar is not there, then the conclusion has a possibility of breaking down. So if you want to figure out what is that unstated idea or what is that assumption, then let's figure out where does the conclusion break down. Okay. And if you know where the conclusion breaks down, so that's again another 2 over here. And then the third thing which is there is, hey, your assumption simply is that those scenarios, once you figure out these scenarios where the conclusion breaks down, your assumption is a statement that prevents those scenarios from existing. Okay. So let's kind of apply this over here. 75% of you get it. For the other 25% to get it, let's apply this over here. Okay. So the question that we're going to ask is, under what circumstances, given all that information in the argument, does my conclusion break down? That's the third statement that I want you to write down. Okay. The first statement was what is pre-thinking. The second was a definition of assumption. The third statement that I want you to remember is this falsification question, which is saying under what circumstances, under what situations, under what scenarios, given the information that I know, does the conclusion break down? Okay. If you get those scenarios, get those circumstances, your assumption is, hey, those scenarios are impossible to happen. Okay. So Can't there be 100 falsification statements? Great question, Puneet. That's where, if you were in the early part of the webinar, you would have heard me say that CR arguments are very tightly knit. They're not open-ended arguments, which means most arguments will have at the most two falsification scenarios. Not falsification statements, but scenarios. There's only one falsification statement, even when you have a very loose argument and you can have 100 scenarios, but when it comes to falsification scenarios, most arguments will have two. A couple would probably have three. That's how good official arguments are. Okay, otherwise, it's too easy, frankly. Okay, so with that, this is the same argument so good question. This is the same argument that we had. I've just split it down into three statements. I'm putting a poll over here, and the question really is which statement is the main conclusion. I want you to tell me. Don't go for option 4 because option 4 doesn't exist over here. There's only three statements here. And I use this poll for another argument, so that's why I have it on this. So which statement do you think is the main conclusion? Let's get this down. I want a few more people chiming in. Which statement do you think is the main conclusion? I have 140 students. I just have what? 55, 56, 60 responses, 63. Guys, you guys did this question. All I'm asking is choose which statement is the main conclusion. 3, 2, and 1. I have 89, 96, 97. Let's get to 100 responses. 99. One more and then I broadcast the results. 99 responses, 100 responses. Good. Let's end the poll. Let's broadcast the results. And you can see 44% of you think statement 2 is the main conclusion. You guys are absolutely correct. Statement 2 is indeed the main conclusion. 30% of you think, or 29% think statement 1 is the main conclusion, and 26% of you think statement 3 is the main conclusion. So let's kind of look at this. Statement 2 is indeed the main conclusion. What is the main conclusion? A main conclusion is a statement that the author wants to assert. That's the author wants to prove that, hey, this is what I want you to take out of this argument. And what does the author want you to take out of this argument or take away from this argument? It is this statement over here where it says the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. Who is the former over here? It's these professors. Okay. This is what the author wants you to believe. Now, a lot of people think statement 1 is the main conclusion. Why? Because they see the word concludes. Now, remember, in an argument, the conclusion always belongs to the author. Here, this word concludes modifies the paper over here. So we're not worried about what the paper has said. What we're worried about is, okay, what do you get out of it? So in this case, this paper which was published, it concludes that tenured professors or those on their way to tenure enhance student learning less than this other group, which is full-time lecturers, do. Okay, based on this data point, so this is a fact over here. We're not disputing this. The author agrees with this fact. He says that clearly, and clearly is a conclusion marker as well, the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with this reward system for the former. What is the former here? These are the professors, as we said. And then statement 3 is a supporting statement that makes my conclusion more believable. It says, hey, the criteria for rewarding tenured faculty places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. So that helps you make statement 2, which is my main conclusion, more believable. Okay. So I want to just spend about 5 seconds to visualize the conclusion. The author, when he makes his conclusion, he's not disputing the paper's finding. He's saying, hey, the findings are there. Blame the reward system for professors for it. Okay, and that's really important for you to visualize and understand. It says, hey, I understand these findings, so he's placing the blame on that reward system. Okay. Read this statement. Can you visualize this? It's very similar to you saying someone giving you a result and you're really putting a blame on why that result happened. Yes, no, if you could be good enough to type it out. Can you visualize this? Okay, perfect. All right. All right, so let's kind of understand the logic that the author uses, which is what we call as the structure of this argument. Okay, and which is where you can really see, how tight the official arguments are. They're very similar to this. This is the main conclusion. This is what the author wants you to believe. Okay. Why isn't option one? Rachita has a question. It's because option one. So Rachita, the definition of main conclusion is what the author wants you to believe. What's the takeaway from this argument? The question that you have to ask is this the takeaway from this argument? Is that what the author wants you to take away? Is that what the author has added? The answer is no. Okay. The author uses this information as a factual piece to come to this takeaway that what causes this difference. Okay. Does that help, Rachita? And this is what the definition of a conclusion is. When you're arguing for something, it's you who arrives at the conclusion, right? So what does visualize mean? Visualize means that you can see this happen in front of you. You put yourself in the shoes of the author and you really say, how am I making? What's the logic that I'm using to arrive at that conclusion? For GMAT questions, will you have only one main conclusion by the author? Yes, but it's not just for GMAT question. In real life, in any scenario, you'll have one conclusion. That one conclusion may have a couple of subparts, but in general, you will have one conclusion. Yes. So the first is truly the evidence of the conclusion, and that's what we're going to see over here. Okay. The first statement provides, it's a fact. It's something that we are not disputing. It's something that is taken as a fact, or you're not going to question that. It sets the context of the stage for the argument, and it supports the conclusion. How do we know it supports the conclusion? Because the conclusion is built on this fact, right? So, and then statement number 3 makes this conclusion more believable over here. It's written to support that main conclusion. Now, statement 3 was also very interesting. What I want you to do is read this statement, focus on this word greater, and I want you to answer this question. And this is a part of visualization as well, which is in statement 3, whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? I'm going to reopen the poll. Is it just tenured faculty, just lecturers, or both tenured faculty and lecturers? Whose reward system does statement 2 talk about? Just tenured faculty, just lecturers, 3, 2, and 1. All right, let me end the poll. We have ample responses, and let me broadcast the results. 72% of you got it right. It is just tenured faculty, but 23% of you say it's both lecturers and tenured faculty, and you'd be wrong. And this is where understanding and visualizing this is really important. The criterion for rewarding tenured faculty, it's very clear, places greater is a comparative word, emphasis on research than on teaching. So what it's saying is that, hey, for tenured faculty, and I'm going to, write this down over here. Sorry about that. For tenured faculty, let's call them TF. There is probably, in the reward system, there is 70% emphasis on research and about 30% on teaching. That's all it's talking about. It doesn't tell us anything about what's there for full-time lecturers. Now, Arushi says, I don't see how 1 supports 2. Okay. So, good question, Arushi, and I can see that because 1's kind of setting the context, and you can say, okay, how does 1 support 2? Now, think about it this way. What if I remove this statement from the argument? What happens to my conclusion? Is my conclusion does it become less logical? If I don't have the information provided by that published paper, does my conclusion become less logical? Yes. So if removal of something reduces my belief in that conclusion, then presence of it increases my belief, right? That's what the definition of supporting something is. So I understand where you're coming from. It does set context, but think about what happens when you remove it from the argument. That's what we call as a litmus test to say whether a statement supports or goes against something. Okay. Does that help you, Arushi? So that's something, again, they're very simple things that you can do over here. All right. So with that, and you can really see how the visualization, as you slow down over here, you get to understand the argument better. As you ask these questions, we've not even gone towards assumptions here. As you ask these questions, you understand the points in your understanding where you're going. You get to know the points in your understanding where you're going wrong. And once you get to know those points, you can improve from that point on. Okay. So our pre-thinking question, same question: under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? Or, which means, if you translate this question, and this is a fairly simple translation now, under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? So what's the conclusion breakdown? You say, would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance? Okay, just look at this. We created that breakdown question there in the Joe argument. It's very similar to this. Under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance? Which means, under what circumstances can you not blame the reward system, given that we know that full-time lecturers enhance student learning more than professors do, and the reward system for professors places greater emphasis on research. The moment I see this, I see Puneet has come up with some really good falsification questions over here, or scenarios over here. Puneet, great job. You came up with 3 assumptions, all of them pretty much right on money, and this is really good. So let's kind of look at this over here. Under what scenario, under what condition will the reward system not cause, or under what condition can you not blame the reward system for the difference in performance that we are seeing, given that for tenured faculty, reward system places a greater emphasis on research? 2 possible scenarios. Hey, if non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system, so if both the groups have the same reward system, then you can't blame the reward system. Can you see that? If non-tenured has an identical reward system, then you can't blame the reward system. Why? Because both entities have the same reward system. Then reward system can't be the one that's responsible. And if, let's say you have this reward system, but what if most tenured faculty doesn't care about it? They don't act as per the reward system. In that case, you can't blame the reward system either. Okay. In either case, these are scenarios in which my conclusion breaks down. So what are my assumptions? Non-tenured faculty do not have an identical reward system, and most professors, most tenured faculty should care about the reward system. It should govern their actions. Okay. Can you see how, when we ask this question, if once we had the conclusion visualized in our brain, as we asked this question, how the assumptions started jumping out at us? Puneet actually came up with I think, one more good assumption over here. Some of you said research does not help you become a good teacher. No, that's actually not a correct assumption. Why? Because what if research does help you to a 20% degree become a good teacher? Does it mean that you should be spending your time on it? If I were to draw a parallel, let's talk about sports. How many of you play sports here? Let's kind of talk about what's the most popular sport that you play. Let's kind of say football, tennis, cricket, swimming. What else? FIFA is 21 is not a sport, guys. Running and basketball, okay. Okay. Football, soccer are the same. MMA, oh wow, I didn't know that. Kickboxing. So let's kind of take this thing over here. Let's take one particular sport. I think football is the world's best known sport over here. And the key to winning, it's a team sport. The key to winning in soccer is, or football as it's known worldwide, is one of the most important things is essentially the coordination between the team, the complementary skills. Now, having said that, does it mean that running, building your endurance while running, that's not useful? It is very useful. But let's say if in a team, if you spend 80% of your time building that endurance, do you think if the 11 players spend 80% of their time building endurance, do you think that team is going to win against another top team? it won't. Why? Because there are these other skills. So in the same way, research could help you in teaching, but it may not be the most effective way to do teaching over there, right? So that's where that statement, research doesn't help professors in teaching, that's why it's not a correct assumption. Just this parallel. It may not be the most effective way to become a good teacher. It might have that 20% impact on this. So running definitely helps. For those of you football fans, this is like the Russian player Mbappe who had the biggest impact in the last World Cup, which France won, and that guy is like, man, when the guy ran, from the few highlights I saw, he would just leave people behind. So yeah, just a deeper question over there. So now, yeah. The thing that I wanted to emphasize on with this argument was the process. Now remember how we've gone about doing this. We did a very simple argument. We understood what an assumption was. We did this open-ended argument. We understood how to do pre-thinking. We kind of build that foundation. Now we want to kind of get better at doing pre-thinking. We want to get better at weeding out incorrect answer choices. And we kind of started some of it over here. The next argument that we're going to talk about will have some, it's an official argument. I'm going to give you guys about 2.5, 3 minutes to look at it. And that's an argument that has a ton of strengtheners in just one assumption. In that argument, if you do this, if you follow the pre-thinking approach, many of you will be able to arrive at the correct answer. If you don't follow the pre-thinking approach, you will get messed up. Okay. Charan is saying, how do you do this under 2 minutes? Charan, we're going to really talk about how you do this under 2 minutes. It's a good question that you have. But I'm going to just give you a statistic over here. If you look at success stories and reviews on GMAT Club over the last one year, you'd notice that we account for about 80% of all verbal related reviews. And pretty much every one of them talks about pre-thinking. So I understand you're worried about timing. This seems like a lot of processing to do, but your brain will be able to do this processing. And I'm going to tell you the journey that you will go through. Okay, but let's focus on this question here and focus on understanding. Okay, so I'm going to reopen this poll and I'm going to give you this argument. Actually, no, I have pre-thinking and timing. Sorry about that. So we will address timing. Charan, your question was probably at the right point. Okay. So here's how you would go through. So in this journey. But by the way, how many of you are worried about timing when you say, man, this is a lot of processing? How many of you are saying, this is going to take very long? Okay. I'm going to ask you to do two things. One, just to increase your belief in me, go to GMAT Club, count the number of reviews in 2020, or even in 2021, count the number of reviews for e-GMAT, number of success stories for GMAT, and number of success stories for other prep companies. And do a ratio, do a simple math ratio. That'll tell you the extent of success. The second thing that I want you to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel, watch some of those success stories. That will actually tell you how people have improved. Why? Because here I'm going to tell you a principle or a conclusion that will give you data to back that conclusion over there. Okay. The conclusion is, when it comes to 700 level questions, this is the only way you're going to be able to do this well, unless you are someone who's a super good critical thinker, in which scenario you probably would not be here in this webinar. Okay. So here's the journey that you will go through. Let's say you are this guy who's at that point number one, which is where your accuracy, which is on the y-axis, is in that low space, and the time to answer questions is medium. Now, when you start doing pre-thinking, two things will happen. Your accuracy will go up. You will solve more questions correctly. Okay. And your time to answer questions will also go up. You can really see in the chart, we're going on the right-hand side. And you're going to really be like this guy. You're going to say, hey, why the hell am I doing this? You know, I already worried about timing on the GMAT. And so this is making me take longer, which, by the way, if you're worried about timing, you attend my next week's session. I'm going to tell you timing is you should worry about timing in the last 20 days, not before that. If you start worrying about timing before, you're not going to get into a situation where you'll get to good scores. So don't worry about timing early on. while preparing. Worry about building skills. Now, as you continue doing pre-thinking, what's going to happen is you're going to get better at visualizing the conclusion. You're going to, as you read a statement, visualization will start to happen a lot more automatically. And at that point, you'd see a drastic reduction in time. Why? Because you visualize the conclusion better. The formulation of that falsification question starts to become better. You will see those patterns in arguments. How many of you remember the first time you learned how to tie shoelaces? How many of you remember that time? For me, it was very traumatic. Learning how to tie shoelaces. How many of you remember that? You remember. How long did it take for you to learn how to tie shoelaces? How much effort? Yeah, for some of us, it was months. For me, it was about 3 months. I remember I went to my mom when the first time I tied them, we were on a picnic and I told her, hey, mom, I tied this shoelace by myself. And I was super proud. Okay. But think about it this way. How long does it take for you to tie a shoelace now? How long does it take for you to tie a shoelace at this particular point in time? Actually, less than a minute, less than probably 4 to 5 seconds for most people, as long as the laces are long enough. You don't even have to look at it. You can talk while tying a shoelace, right? That's pre-thinking is the same way. When you're doing this, initially you'd see, hey, I've got to learn how to visualize the conclusion. I've got to build that logical structure, and so it seems super complex, and it'll take you some time. That's about 1 to 3 is about 20 good questions with really great solutions. But once you get to 3, you'd be able to do it just like this. Okay. You've done this for 25 years every day, but 90% of improvement happened in the first 20 days once you learned how to do this. Okay. It's like learning how to drive a car. Driving a car seems very complex for the first 15 days or so, but then, if you are a woman, God knows you do makeup, you eat breakfast. Men eat breakfast too, but women do quite a few more things while driving a car than men do, because their lives are more complex. But my point really is, these are skills, and skills. You build skills. When you're building that skill, you need to put in more effort. Once you built it, it seems like second nature. So it get to that level too. Once you get there, there's no stopping you. Continue to do pre-thinking because that is your key to success. Now, the other option, if you don't want to do pre-thinking, is wear shoes with Velcro. Unfortunately, you're not going to get the best fit. Unfortunately, you would struggle with 700 level questions if you want to get to that 80th, 90th percentile in CR. It'd be difficult for you to get there. You'd be able to get to that 60th percentile without doing pre-thinking, but not to that 80th, 90th percentile. Okay. Here's a statement that someone said. He says, understand the term passage completely. Take your time. Equally important, pre-think an answer before looking at the answer choice. Probably this one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. There's a guy who recently got into GSP Chicago. He said, answer CR questions as if there are no answer choices. So this is a guy who scored 700, did not do pre-thinking, came back to us and said, help me improve. And we actually looked at where he was struggling. We said, that's the only thing you need because his SC was correct, his CR was, his RC was there, his quant was perfect. Spent about 12 days doing pre-thinking and took the test, 20 days from his first attempt, improved to 770. When it gets to 700 level questions, you have to do pre-thinking. The reason is it helps you focus on the logic and not deviate from the key argument when the trap or out of scope answer choices show up. How many of you have seen that? You get to answer choices and you feel, hey, I don't know, every answer choice seems correct. How many of you have done that? Yes. At first, yes, that propensity is going to go down tremendously. If you want to look at this, if you click on GMU 770, you guys can go watch his success story over there. Okay. Here's another guy who says pre-thinking primes the mind, and we're constantly on our toes while reading a paragraph or a CR question stem. Apart from comprehending the passage, we keep calculating in which direction the passage is going. So pre-thinking is something which you need not just in CR but also in RC. It helps you tremendously in RC. This guy went from 520 to 740. Okay. Now, enough talking. Let's talk about applying pre-thinking and getting clarity as to which answer choice is the correct answer choice. Here is your question. Good luck, guys. You have about 2.5 minutes to solve this question. Okay, guys, last 15 seconds, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. And I'm going to broadcast the results. As you look at the results, you can see choices B and E are two choices which are very popular. Choices C and D are C, D, actually even choice A is extremely popular as well. So let's get in here. Let's go to the short answer poll over here. How many of you, when you looked at these answer choices, or first when you looked at the argument, felt, hey, the argument's simple, but when you looked at the answer choices, you're scratching your head? How many of you really said, man, the answer choices seem very difficult? Okay, many of you did that, yes. I see about 70% yeses, about 30% no's over here. So let's kind of see how we go about doing this, and let's see how pre-thinking helps eliminate that confusion. Okay, let me just clear these responses over here, and let's start to have fun. Very simple argument. What's going on? We want to finance road repairs, and the Highway Commission is considering, 50% increase, a really steep increase in the toll, and the toll is currently at 10 cents per mile, and we're looking at this 50% increase on that. What does the commissioner claim? He claims that the toll increase will increase this annual revenue by at least 50% this year. So if this happens, the annual revenue is going to go up by 50%. Okay. The question says, which of the following is an assumption on which his claim depends? All right. So that's your question here. So let's visualize the conclusion. The conclusion, what the claim that's made by the Highway Commissioner is that the annual revenue generated will go up by at least 50%. So then the question is, how do we estimate annual revenue? How do we estimate annual revenue? Can you guys tell me? How do we estimate annual revenue? In this case, in this context, price times miles. Perfect. Yes. Miles times actually not 10, but 15 in this case. 10 is the present value, right? Miles times the price per mile. So annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by the total number of miles. Simple yes no poll. Can everyone see that? Those who are saying profit minus cost, again, look at the context. In this case, annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by total number of toll miles. Now what's given to us? What's given to us is that the toll per mile is going to go up by about 50%. That's the proposal, by at least 50% per year. So in what scenario can my conclusion break down? In what scenario will the annual revenue not go up by 50%? In what scenario? If there are fewer miles driven, right? If there are fewer miles driven, if there's decrease in total number of miles driven. Everyone gets that? How is the second statement the conclusion? No, second statement is not the conclusion. The second statement combined with the question statement is the conclusion here. The question statement says, what's the assumption on which the commissioner's claim depends? What does the commissioner claim while making an assumption, assume while making his claim that the annual revenue will increase by at least 50% this year? Okay. So the assumption is a decrease in miles. Okay. So the question which is there is, under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by 50% provided that the toll per mile has increased by 50%? We know this is going to go up, and the answer to this is if the total number of miles driven decreases. So what's the assumption? That the total number of miles driven does not decrease. Okay. Can you see there's only just one assumption here, and you can see once you ask that falsification question, the assumption is very clear. Can everyone see this over here? See the pre-thinking? Right? Was this difficult, by the way, so far? Was it difficult? No, very simple, right? We can visualize the situation, we can see what's going on over here. Now let's look at the answer choices. All we have to really look at is which answer choice, really say this, that the total number of miles driven does not decrease. Okay, that's all that we need to say. Okay, let's look at choice B. Choice B, a lot of you chose it. Choice B is an incorrect answer choice. Choice B says this is choice B. Okay, the total number of trips made on the toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. Now the question that we have to ask is, does this mean that the total number of miles driven will go down? The answer is not really. Why? Because let's say earlier I was making, people were making 1,000 trips, but now they're making 900 trips. So the trips do decrease. But what if everyone spends more miles per trip? Okay. Look at choice B over here. This was choice B. Many of you chose choice B. You have to really say, it says the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from its current level. You ask this question, does it mean that the total number of miles driven will go down? The answer is no, right? Because even if the total number of trips go down by, let's say, 10%, the mileage per trip can go up. How do you even realize that you had to break annual revenue? Because that's what the information is given over there. And it's given to you, it's a toll per mile. So that's how you have to really just say that you have to take those clues from the argument. How many of you had problems in figuring out this formula? Let's just do a yes, no. How many of you had problems in figuring out this or a version of this formula over here? Let's put a generic yes, no. I mean, if you're taking the GMAT, you should know this. You should be able to do this. How many of you could do this? Select yes if you could do this. Select yes if you could really do this by yourself. And select no if you say I had a difficult time putting this together. And you can see 70% of you were able to do this over here. The other 30% need to solve more such questions so that you can do this together. Now, how do you go about doing this? Here is the argument. The argument is telling you that the Highway Commission is considering a 50% increase in this toll, 10 cents per mile, which means I'm getting toll on a per mile basis. Okay, and I'm looking at a 50% increase. The Highway Commissioner claims that the toll increase, okay, will increase the annual revenue by 50%. If I'm charging on a per mile basis, what is annual revenue? How many miles I drive multiplied by how much I charge per mile. It's like buying 20 chocolates. How much would you pay? How much you pay per chocolate multiplied by 20, right? I mean, this is something that the test expects. This is something business schools expect that you'd come in. Okay. And you need to get into the habit of doing that. If you have a difficult time doing this, then you have to read slowly. You have to translate. Okay. Let's go to choice B. People who chose choice B, can you really see why choice B is wrong? Why? Because it doesn't satisfy the must be true condition. Because even if the total number of trips go down, then miles per trip can go up. Okay. The question is this a must be true? Let's look at choice E, which is the correct answer, and then I'm going to come to the other choices as well, because you've chosen choices C, D, and A as well. The choice E, the correct answer, talks about the total distance traveled on the toll highway. If the total distance traveled decreases, then the number of miles, what happens to the number of miles? It decreases, right? If the total distance decreases, the number of miles will also come down, which means that, hey, this is a must be true. Why? Because you don't want the total distance to come down. People who chose other answer choices, can you see how choice E satisfies that must be true condition? Now can you see? I want to see a few more yeses, guys. Come on. Okay. Now let's look at other answer choices. Some of you have talked about choice C. Choice C says the average length of a trip will not decrease from its current level. What happens if the average length of a trip does decrease from its current level? What can compensate? What can compensate for average length of a trip? The total number of trips. Yes, you can get more trips. It's actually the opposite of choice B, right? If you think about this versus choice B, okay, same thing with number of drivers who consistently avoid. If there are more drivers who are avoiding, then those who are on the toll highway can take longer trips. Okay, which means that choices B, C, and D, great strengtheners. You know, if you know this information, it's going to increase your belief in the conclusion, but not assumptions. So this is a question. The reason why I have this is it's a great question to show assumption versus strengthen. Choice B is a good strengthener. Choice C is a good strengthener. Choice D is a good strengthener. Choice E is a good strengthener. But only choice E is the correct assumption. B, C, and D are not correct assumptions. Why? Because they do not satisfy the must be true criteria. Hopefully, now you've started to appreciate that nature of must be true more. Okay. For those of you who chose choice A, okay, you've got to look at what does Highway Commissioner's claim. Is the Highway Commissioner claiming that 50% increase is going to provide enough money? Is that what he's claiming? No, he's not claiming that, which is why choice A can't be the correct answer. All he's saying is that, hey, there's a 50% increase and that will lead to an annual revenue increase by about at least 50%. It could be 60, 50, 70, but at least 50%. Now, whether that money is enough to finance these road repairs, we don't know. That's not what his claim is. So if he gets to that increase and the estimator comes in and says, sorry, buddy, you need more money, would you fire the commissioner? No, you won't. You would fire the estimator. It's like, why the hell did you give me the wrong estimate? Okay. Now, coming back to this, can you now appreciate the must be true nature of an assumption? Can you now see how, if you ask the pre-thinking question, how if you visualize the conclusion and the answer choices, the correct answer just jumps out at you? Okay, so now we are in for a 2-question mini marathon. Okay, 2 really difficult questions, probably the most challenging questions that the test will throw at you. These questions have curveballs. These questions have language which where you need to slow down and it will compel you to kind of read and reread. So read them slowly. What is the new info in this assumption? The total distance will not decrease. Do you know that whether the total distance will decrease or not in this, Tarun? If you read the argument, just this part from here, can you infer this? But the total distance, even when you go to the price increase, can you infer this? Tarun has a question. He's saying, what's the new info in this assumption? The new info is that in the argument, there's nothing that really talks about what would happen to the total distance traveled once we do the price increase. This choice provides an answer to that. Okay. All right. So once again, for those of you who wanted to get that study plan before we get into the marathon, you guys can get that study plan over here in this case, which will provide you with these personalized milestones. It will give you precise estimates of the time required. It will get you the metrics. Okay. Once you click on this, you can really choose the issue that you're facing. If you're facing timing issues, if you're stuck at 620, if you're at a very low score, or if you need help just in verbal or just in quant, you can choose that as well. And as you do that, you'll see a case study. As that case study resonates with you, you can click on help me reach my target score. That way it would help you work with someone who's a certified expert in that area. Okay. Book your time slot, and then as you do that, you'll answer certain questions as well. Okay. You're an e-GMAT student. This is something that you should already have. And make sure that you're attending these onboarding sessions and attending the test readiness sessions over there. If you have questions about the 3 stages of learning, which is how your ability increase happens, do write to us. Okay. With that, let's go and start solving the last 2 questions in our session today. Okay, I'm going to hide this. So the way we do these last 2 questions is that I don't want to time you guys because these are difficult questions. So what I want you to do is I want about 60 of you to say still not answered over here, and when you guys actually choose an option other than this, then I know that you're done with solving the question. Okay, let's get about 60 of you to say not answered. I have about 43, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 55, 57, and 60. All right, I'm going to remove broadcast results. Here is the first question. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, another 20 seconds. Get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. This was a difficult question. You can see how people polled. Choice D was really popular. Choice A was popular, as was choice B. And then about 10 of you weren't able to get to the correct answer. We're going to do the same exercise with this one. I want about 60 of you to say not answered. And then I'm going to show the next question. The next question is still a difficult question, but it's easier than the RDS technology question. Okay, let's get about 60 of you over here. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here is the question. All right, let's get those answers in. 3, 2, and 1. Let us end the poll. Let's broadcast the results. Okay, so C, D, E, very popular choice, is quite popular as well. That is good. How are these questions? How are these questions? They were tricky. They were difficult questions, I said. Okay, tricky, tough, yes. Let's see. Let's distill this. These are all 700 level questions. You have a headache now. One of the things that you've got to do when you're learning, and it doesn't matter whether I'm talking about verbal or quant, is when you see your brain getting overwhelmed, slow down. Okay, because if you get into that zone where your brain is being overwhelmed, you're going to find it very difficult to comprehend anything. You're going to end up wasting time. So let's kind of slow down. Let's visualize the conclusion. We're going to talk about the first question, RDS technologies. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to look at that so that you can refresh the argument over here. And then let's look at what the conclusion is. The conclusion is that the number of overlanders who received this special program information did not increase significantly during this time period. So let's visualize this. So you guys asked what's visualizing this. So essentially what this is saying is if we had about 1,000 overlanders who received the special program information in 94, let's see if I can write 9 properly, then we still have about 1,000. It could be 1,010, but round about 1,000 in 96. Okay, that's kind of what I'm saying. And I'm only worried about special program information, and I'm not worried about other pieces over here. I will share the answer poll. I'm going to broadcast the answers. Yes, so don't worry about this. But let's first come to this over here. The conclusion, is that clear? That's what this conclusion is saying. We had 1,000 people who got the special program information in 94. We have 1,000 people in 96 as well. Yes, no? Just appreciate a response, guys. Okay. All right. So this is what we call as a logical structure or argument structure. The main conclusion says the number of people receiving this information remains the same. Why does this happen? Why? Because, hey, the number of receiving radios, which is radios that people have, they remain the same in 94 and 96, but the number of transmitting station actually go up. They increase from 250 to 600. So there are two opposing things over here and there, and they're opposing. Why? Because from the context, this is an increase in number, and this is a constant, and then they're connected. The other pieces you can see from a structure standpoint, they're connected by however. Okay. Now, statement number 3 supports my conclusion. Why? Because if you have the number of overlanders remain the same and the number of receiving radios remain the same, that kind of goes in line with this. Statement number 2, the number of transmission towers, that kind of goes against the conclusion. Why? Because it's connected with 3, however. Also, you would think if you have more transmitting towers, you should reach more people. Okay. Statement number 1 sets the context. It really says that, hey, radio systems with this RDS technology, they broadcast special program information that only radios with RDS technology can receive, which means that, hey, you need a mated set. You need a radio station with the technology, you need the receiver with that technology to receive this thing called special program information. Okay. Again, a simplified logical structure. The context says to receive RDS programming, you need a mated set. Between 94 and 96, the number of radios remained almost unchanged. The number of transmitting stations increased a lot. And based on this, what the author is concluding is that very few additional overlanders received RDS programs. So we ask the same falsification question. It says, under what conditions will there be a significant increase or significant addition to the number of people receiving this special program information or RDS programming, given that we have very few additional radios? So this radio sets that you keep in your house, they're very few, but the transmission stations are a lot. So what are some of the possible scenarios in which you can break this conclusion down? Let's kind of use your creativity, guys. What are the possible scenarios in which this conclusion will break down? In what possible scenarios? Okay, if the area of receiving signal is high, as the stations are high, so as you put in more stations, you actually increase the coverage. If people can receive program via the radios. Now, if that were to happen, it would break the conclusion, but that would go against the fact over here, which is the context that's set for you. So that's not a plausible answer. Even though if this were possible, it would be there, but that's not how CR arguments are constructed. You can't go against the facts. Okay. If more people are using radios with neighbors, yes, if people per radio go up or if we increase the coverage. Okay. So the possible scenarios which are there in which you break the conclusion is if these new stations, these new radio stations over here, they are put in places where people had the right radio, but there was no coverage earlier. Or the second thing is if you start putting these radios in Starbucks, so even if the number of radios remain the same, but people per radio go up. You guys came up with this. Can you see both these scenarios will break the conclusion? Can you see that? Both these scenarios, the conclusion is going to be destroyed. So what are my assumptions? The new stations should not lead to a significant increase in coverage where people have the right kind of radio, and people per radio kind of should remain more or less the same. Right? These are the two possible assumptions that I can have from this. Can you see how we translated the possible scenarios into assumptions? The breakdown scenarios, these are breakdown scenarios over here. And these then translate into assumptions. That's kind of your falsification method. Okay, with that, let me just share the poll results over here. You know how you guys polled. Hold on. Where is my poll? Hold on, is it here? Is it instantiated? Just give me 1 second, guys. I want to bring in that poll. Yeah, I found it here. Yes. Here is how you guys polled. Sorry about that. Here is how you guys polled. And you can see choice A was 23%, choice D was very, very popular. And then as was choice B. So let's kind of look into these answer choices. So choice A is the correct answer. Choice A says few, if any, of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94 broadcast to people with the right kind of radios living in. It's a very complex choice. So let's kind of go piece by piece. Few, if any is almost none of the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94. What are the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94? That's the new RDS stations. Okay. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached by the older stations, essentially. So what does that mean? This means increasing the coverage of RDS programming. So what this choice is saying is that the new RDS stations, almost none of those increase the coverage of RDS programming, or almost none of these stations reach people who had, the right kind of radios, but were not previously reached by the existing 250 stations. So we are not putting the new stations in areas where people had the radios, but had no coverage. Let's kind of do the negation test on this. The negation test on this is that at least some radio stations increase coverage. If at least some radio stations increase coverage, then can you really say that the number of people who receive this special program information between 94 and 96 did not change a whole lot? No, you can't say that. Why? Because in 94, maybe you had 10,000 people, only 2,000 had coverage. In 96, If this part is true, maybe 3,000 have coverage now. So yes, the number of people receiving special program information will grow up. So you can't let this negated version to take place, which means this has to be there. The new radio stations should not be put in places where they increase coverage. Everyone, regardless of the answer choice you chose, can you see how this is the correct assumption? How the new radio stations should not be put in areas such that they increase coverage. Now, yes, good. Perfect. Okay. Let's look at other answer choices and see why they are wrong. Now remember, what's the definition of an assumption? It's an unstated idea that an assumption is an unstated idea that I want you guys to, that must be true for the conclusion to hold valid. Okay, it must satisfy that must be true condition. Let's look at choice B with that, keeping that in mind. Choice B says, in 1996, most Worlanders who lived within the listening area of an RDS station, they already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. So essentially what this choice is saying is, hey, if you, more than 50% of the Worlanders who lived in the listening area of an RDS station had, this high quality radio, RDS radio. Now my question is, the conclusion is about that, saying that, hey, in 94 versus 96, the number of Worlanders receiving special program information, that number shouldn't change. So is it required that more than 50% of our Worlanders have this special program information, this nicer radio? In other words, what I would say is, if in 94, 20% of Worlanders had the nice radio, and in 96 also the same 20% had the nice radio, would my conclusion not still hold true? So is that most required for that must be true? Well, do I need that 60% of Worlanders or 70% of Worlanders or 51% of Worlanders own an RDS radio? No. Why? Because even if 20% own that in 94 and 20% own that in 96, I'm still okay. So this is not must be true. This can't be my correct assumption. Why? Because if I negate this, I say, hey, most Worlanders in 96 did not possess it, then what happens to my conclusion? Nothing. It doesn't break down. Okay. This answer choice talks about something that's kind of not relevant to what we're talking about at all. Okay. A lot of wordplay. Yes, you're right. Equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease a station's listening area. Okay. Now, tell me this. What kind of programming are we interested in the conclusion? What kind of programming are we interested in? Special programming. RDS or special, it's the same thing. Let's kind of use them interchangeably over here. So if a radio station does not have RDS technology, then can it broadcast special programming? No, it can't, right? It can't. The argument tells us that, which means the range of a radio station, the RDS range of a radio station, okay, when it doesn't have this special technology is 0. Right? The RDS range of the radio station, if it doesn't have the special technology, is 0 because it can't even broadcast that. Right? So when you look at this answer choice, you say, hey, equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease the station's listening area. Given what we know, what kind of programming is this talking about? Special or non-special? What kind of programming is it talking about? Non-special. Because the special programming, the range for that is 0 before you equip it. How many of you have 4G phones? Over here. I mean, that's kind of, I think, the really good parallel over here. If you need a 4G phone to be able to watch a movie on your phone, for those of you who have a 3G phone, What's your ability to watch movies? 0, right? So if you go from a 3G phone to a 4G phone and you really say, hey, my equipping a phone with a 4G technology does not decrease its the screen time. Does it have an impact on your ability to watch movies? No, you're not talking about the ability to watch movies. Why? Because of the 3G phone, that screen time wasn't even relevant. Our conclusion is about special programming. This impact on range or station's listening area is not about special programming. Why? Because prior to equipping a radio station with RDS technology, there was no ability to transmit special programming. The range of special programming prior to equipping the radio station with this was what? 0. Read this again. Ask yourself, what was the range of special programming or listening area for special programming for a radio station before it had RDS technology? None. So if the listening area is impacted, what kind of programming is impacted? Is it special or non-special? It's non-special, right? Yeah, because you can't go less than 0 when it comes to listening area. It has to be 0. Okay. Again, you could have just rejected it. Now let's look at choice D. A lot of you chose choice D. Okay. Choice D is wrong on many counts. If you just focus on the conclusion, you would have rejected choice D. Choice D says, in 1996, were landers who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS. Do we care about people who don't have RDS radios? Do we care about those guys, given the context in the argument? No, we don't. Could not receive any programming. Do we care about any programming? No, we don't. We only care about RDS programming, right? So why is this choice wrong? It talks about people who don't have the right kind of radio. It talks about programming that we don't care about. Okay, it has nothing to do with this. Remember, the argument tells us as a fact, to receive RDS programming, you need to have an RDS radio. You need to be within the range of an RDS station. Okay. Type of programming is irrelevant. Can you see all the options again? Let me see if I can get you the options over here. Let's see. Here are the options. Okay, what did you learn from this question? Is it a difficult question? What did you learn from this? Choice A was the answer. First, make sure you understand the conclusion. Okay, take time, read carefully. Can we go over option A again? Yes. Let's go over option A again. First of all, how many of you, let's kind of focus on this. You guys did the pre-thinking, right? How many of you guys understand if the new stations increase coverage, my conclusion will break down, right? Does everyone understand that? If I put these new stations and they reach people who had the right kind of radio, but were not reachable, my conclusion will break down, right? So my assumption is these new stations should not increase the coverage. They should really be put in those areas where there was already coverage. Everyone agrees with this? With that in mind, let's look at choice A and read it slowly. Choice A says, this is choice A, by the way. Few, if any, of the RDS equipped. Let's kind of remove this so the annotations are gone. Choice A says, few, if any, of the RDS equipped stations that began broadcasting after 94. Which stations began broadcasting after 94? Which stations began broadcasting after? The new stations. No, the new stations, the ones that are put in place, right? From 250 to 600, the delta. So it says few, if any, of the RDS stations. Yeah, these are special stations, yes, but these are the new stations, right? That began broadcasting after 94. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. So what it's saying is, hey, if this is my area over here, and these people who lived over here were all covered earlier, these people were not covered earlier. What it's saying is the new stations were primarily put in this area where there was coverage. They were not put in this area. Okay. Few, if any, means almost none. Almost none of the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94 broadcast to people living in RDS equipped, living in areas not previously reached. So which were the areas not previously reached? These were the areas not previously reached. And it's saying the new stations over here. So let's call this star as a new station. So these new stations don't come over here. They primarily come over here. Can you guys see this now? Translate this answer choice. Okay. So it's just broadcasting to the same people that was there earlier. Okay. This is the correct answer. You have the negated version over here. Choice B, again, for those of you, choice B is a strengthener. It's not an assumption in any world. Choice B says, hey, for the number of people to remain the same in 94 and in 96, in 96, 60% of all Verlanders should have an RDS equipped radio for the number of people to remain the same. Is that required? What if 20% of all landers had an RDS equipped radio in 94, the same 20% had an RDS equipped radio in 96? Can the conclusion still not be true? Oh, it can still be. Why do you need most? Why do you need more than 50%? Tell me, why do you need more? Why is that a must be true from that very definition of an assumption? For those of you who are saying, I feel B is still stronger. Why do you need that? What is the conclusion? The number of people who received special programming in 94 and the number of people who received special programming in 96 still remains the same. Okay, for that, do you need that a majority or most have a special radio? No, not necessarily. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next question. The next question is a lot easier. This is a heavy question. You look at the solution, you try solving it again. Trust me, you'll learn so much from this question that it'll help you solve 10 other difficult questions. No. In second option D, aren't we considering second scenario with people per radio? No. What does choice D say? Choice D says, here is choice D. In 1996, people who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS could not receive any programming. Okay. Any programming doesn't mean they're sharing. That means saying that it's non-RDS programming, right? What does any programming mean? RDS versus non-RDS. Yes, any programming from RDS. RDS stations also transmit programs with non-special information. It's not that they only transmit. I mean, think about it, right? Your 4G stations still give you your text messages and your phone calls. Okay. I understand this is a difficult question over here. So Shelby will refuse. Much easier question, and let's visualize this. Okay. So what happened last year? Last year, we collected a bunch of refuse. We didn't send any for recycling. We burned everything. We incinerated everything. Let's assume one of these trash cans is a truck. How many trucks did we send for incineration last year? Good. 10 trucks. Right? We sent 10 trucks. Now what are we going to do this year? We want to reduce the amount of ash, residual ash. This incineration produced a lot of residual ash. What are we going to do this year? Tell me. No, what are we going to do this year? 5 is the output. We're going to recycle more. Right? This year, we're going to recycle more and we're going to send, if last year we had 10 trucks, we're going to send only 5 trucks. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to produce less residual ash. How much less? Half less, 50% less. Okay. Now, here is my question. You have the argument right in front of you, and this is where the beauty of language in this question is. Okay. Now, instead of collecting the same amount of refuse this year, what if I collect 10x as much refuse? If this year I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks do you think in that case would be sent for incineration? If instead of collecting the same amount of refuse, if I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks do you think I'll send for incineration this year? Just visualization. That's kind of visualizing the argument, visualizing the logic, or visualizing the information in the argument. If I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks will I send for incineration? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results, and you can see 43% of you says 50, 18% say 7, 28% say 5. The correct answer is 5. It's still 5. Let's kind of see why that is the case. And this is where beauty of language comes in. This is such a beautiful official question. The logic is simple. The language is so beautiful. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. What this is saying is, hey, regardless of the amount of refuse you collect, I am only going to send half as many trucks as I sent last year. So if I sent 10 trucks last year, this year, I'm going to give you 5 trucks, regardless of this piece, regardless of the refuse. Can you see this? Read that line again. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. It's a comparative statement to half of last year's number. So even if I collect 10 times as much refuse, I'm only going to get 5 trucks. That's visualization. You do that visualization, you get to the answer quickly. Guys, more participation, more energy. Where is it? Can you guys see this? Perfect. So again, you guys know this piece over here. We're going to go right to the falsification question. Again, the question that we have to ask is, under what conditions will the ash generated be greater than 50%? Why? Remember, because our goal was 50% if I only get half as many trucks. What is the only condition in which the ash generated can be greater than 50% if you get only half as many trucks? What is the only condition? If each truck generates more ash, yes. If each truck generates more ash, that's the only scenario in which my conclusion would break down, which means the assumption is that my ash per truckload means I want to make sure that the trucks are not stuffed so much that I put 3x as much refuse this time as I put last time. So my assumption is that the ash per truckload is going to be similar to or lower than what it was last year. Okay, that's my assumption over here, which is what is my correct answer. Now, remember earlier on in the session, I said there's going to be one question in which there will be an option which will satisfy the must be true condition, but will not provide any new information. That's option A over here. Option A says this year, no materials that are separated for recycling will be incinerated, or essentially what it's saying is the recycled materials will not be incinerated. Is it a must be true? Yes. If you're recycling something, you shouldn't be incinerating. But you can already infer that from the answer choices. So that's why, because it doesn't provide any new information, it is not a correct answer. So 13 of you chose choice A. You can really see why that is incorrect. Choice B, very few people chose, so I'm not going to worry about it. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials, and it compares that to what it was last year. Does the proportion matter? No, it doesn't matter. Why? Because I'm only sending 5 trucks. Okay. People who chose choice C was very popular. Can you now see why C is wrong? Can you see that? Yeah, you're only getting 5 trucks, and those 5 trucks are the only things that will be incinerated. Okay. Choice D talks about the ash per truckload. Again, it compares it and it says, this time the ash per truckload is going to be very similar to or less than what it was last year. Which is the same as our pre-thinking was. You do the negation test and you really see. If you do the negation test on this, you're going to see that the conclusion breaks down. Choice E talks about the total quantity of refuse. We talked about choice E. Choice E was popular as well. Again, total quantity doesn't matter. Why? Because we'll still be sending half as many truckloads. Okay. So that's why you're going to really say. So if the recyclable material is more for choice C, someone is saying, can I go over choice D? Yeah, I can go over choice D again. The refuse incinerated just this year will generate no more residual ash per truckload incinerated than did the refuse incinerated last year. So again, if you've gone through the SC course, you know this is a comparative statement. It's comparing the amount of refuse generated per truckload last year versus this year. Okay. And what it's saying is, if last year you generated a ton of refuse per truck, this year you're going to generate up to a ton of refuse per truck, ash per truck, and no more than that. Okay. Choice D is the correct answer. It's written over here. You don't need to worry about it. You say wrong, you see correct over here. You don't need to, even if you don't hear me say that, you should be able to see it. Okay. Any doubts? We did all of this in our pre-thinking, guys. This should now be very, very fast. All right. With that, let's see how you become a CR champ over here. The first thing you've got to do is make sure you understand this. When it comes to pre-thinking, this isn't rocket science. This is about visualization. This is about comprehending. And so you've got to learn how to comprehend this, because once you do that, you can do both things. You can solve difficult questions. You can do them faster. Why? Because it cuts the clutter away. People save a ton of time because of pre-thinking over here. So what are some of the next steps? If you've not gone through this was a very heavy session. There's a lot of application that went on. How many of you are you're brain dead right now? Tell me. How many of you are brain dead? Okay. Okay. So yes, nearly there. Yes, and it's good. This is an indication of time well spent. If you're really saying, my brain's heavy, I'm ready to take a break. Or if it's evening for you, open a bottle of wine or drink some beer or so. So as next steps, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, start with this introduction to assumption, then go towards pre-thinking, logical gap, and two entities. You do this is going to be cemented in your brain. Each of these files is about 30-35 minutes long. Each of these files has a lot of examples, a lot of exercises to evaluate you. So you'd love this. Okay. If you are a paid student, you have a lot more to you. We'll make sure. So the assumption module sets the foundation for argument type questions. So you understand what an assumption is, you understand how an argument is constructed, you then go through the logical gap type arguments, you go through an argument that compares two entities, you go through an argument where we compare segments to of the same quantity, and again and then you go through arguments where there's a comparison of unlike entities that's happening, and then quant focused arguments as well. So the highway miles was an example of a quant focused argument that we did. You do this, you learn pre-thinking for every possible argument structure that the test will throw at you. Then you learn how to apply this in an application, in another set of application files. These are all 700 level questions over here. You get ample practice through this in this case. Okay. The key thing that you have to really say is, this is something where you're not just learning what an assumption is, which by the way we learned today, but it's an integrated environment where you're learning the conceptual part of assumption and the various argument structures. You're learning how to apply the pre-thinking approach to these argument structures, and then you're being evaluated over here And based on this, you go back, revise certain things, or you move on to the next, depending on what the system really tells you. And that's kind of where you get way more feedback than what you'd get from a private tutor. Okay. So that's where, make sure you do this in an integrated fashion where you learn the concepts, you learn the argument types over there, learn how to apply this, look at data, look at what the feedback's telling you with regards to your natural strengths, natural weaknesses. Why? Because each one of you will get certain kinds of arguments right away, and certain kinds of arguments would require more effort. A few of you probably got the highway miles argument right away. A few of you really said, man, why did that B, C, and D were still correct? Okay. How comprehensive is this? Way more comprehensive than anything else that you really say. Just the entire CR course, along with Scholaranium, has about 524 full-length questions. Not the smaller questions, but full-length questions over here. It's about 10 times more than what you'd get from the Manhattan book, or about 6.5 times more from the CR Bible. Why is this? Because it is about building capability. It is about getting you to that 90th percentile over there. Okay. And look at watch some interviews on our YouTube channel and see how people, when they focus on this in a concentrated fashion, they improve to these amazing lengths. So Anupriya scored a V46. She was stuck at that V32 again. What did she do? She just focused on one thing at a time. And about 20 days, she went from that V32 to V46. V46 was about 99th percentile on verbal. Here's a guy who's very logical guy. It's a very entertaining interview that I have over here. This guy taught physics, and he said, CR should be natural, should come naturally to him, and he kind of recognized the same thing when he tried to solve a visual question. He said language has this way of manipulating your mind, and GMAT's really good. I mean, they have to be if they have to differentiate between individuals over there. But then he says, just put that extra 5 to 10 seconds to pre-think, and you'd be able to overcome those traps over there. Okay, so start doing pre-thinking. Start with this part over here, and get done with your CR in about 10 to 12 days. You don't need a whole lot. You do go through the inference module, go through the assumption, then go through evaluate. 90% of what you need to learn is there. Okay. So thank you for that feedback. Let me actually share the session PDF with you over here so that you can download this PDF. And with that, let me just hide this. Anisha, yes, choice D was the correct answer. Yes, and you can download the PDF and you can look at that as well. And again, as I said, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'd be able to see all of these. You'd be able to see users' journeys, how they went from that 500 to that 700 or that 550 to that 750 over here. And for those of you who want to figure out how much time you need, take a Sigma X mark, book some time with a certified expert over here. And by the way, this piece over here, and now I'm getting the questions wrong. Now I want to learn this properly. Really great trait. I mean, it's not about how many questions you got right. It's about what you learned during this webinar and then what you do right next to it. How do you enroll in e-GMAT, Anisha? Just go to the website, buy the course. I mean, pretty much everything that you need to know is on the web. So. Okay, with that, if there's any other question, I'd be happy to address that. On the online GMAT, are you allowed to read out loud, or will the system take it as cheating? It's not allowed to read out loud, even whether you're talking about on the online GMAT or on the incentive GMAT, you're not allowed to. And it's not because they think you would be cheating. It's just that they can't really figure out if there's someone else sitting in the room and you're reading the question out to them, unfortunately. So so that's something which I want to make sure that that they will not allow you to do this. I recently recorded a video on the changes on the online GMAT. Okay, you guys can watch this video over here. Andy says, I'm starting the CR module next week on e-GMAT and I'm running short on time. Do you recommend reading the CR Bible in parallel? Don't read the CR Bible, Andy. No, because the CR Bible will not teach you pre-thinking. So you'd get conflicting information. Thing that I would really say is go through the inference module and the assumption module. That's 80% of the learning if you're running short on time, and go and do high intensity learning. Don't switch between subsections. CR, in my opinion, is the most challenging subsection on either side of either quant or verbal. Why? Because in CR is the only place where you have to go outside the argument. So that is what the challenge is. You have to bring in your understanding. You have to bring in new information there. So don't read the CR Bible. Just trust the system. Trust what the feedback that it's giving you, and you'd see that improvement happen. Does e-GMAT deal with only 700 level questions? No, we deal with easy, medium, and hard. It's just when you want to demonstrate a method, 700 level questions are a better way to demonstrate the method. But yes, in the files you'll see really basic questions. I mean the reason why we have people go from 450 to 700 is because we start with the very basics. You'll see people talk about a master comprehension course where we teach you how to read a sentence. We start with a 2-word sentence and build 70-80 word sentences over there. Good question. All right, guys. With that, I want to thank you for joining me today. It was wonderful hosting you guys here, and I wish you good luck. And hopefully, some of you would pop a beer, and a few of you would go into practicing learning. Okay. So Andy's question is, are these questions mixed up? They are mixed up, Andy, during this. You don't get all SC questions during the test and then all CR questions. You get jumbled up questions over there. Jessica says, is it all right to prepare in this order? CR, algebra, and then SC. So Jessica, again, is it all right? I need to know a bit more. So I'd say write to the support team. I want to see your starting abilities first. For example, if your starting ability in SC and CR, they're both at around, let's say 40-50 percentile, then in that case, I would recommend that you start with a master comprehension and then SC and then CR. And the reason for that is, you saw in this session, you had a number of statements where we are comparing things, and comparisons are they're all throughout in critical reasoning. As you get through SC, you understand comparisons a lot better, which means you're able to visualize those things in CR a lot better. So if the only way you do CR first and then SC is if you're already at that 70th percentile in CR and you say, okay, I'm almost there. Let me just finish it and then move on to SC post that, because in SC I have the chasm that I need to cover is a bit more. Okay. Does that help, Jessica? So get your starting abilities, and if your starting ability in SC and CR is very similar, do SC first and then do CR. Nam says, I'm able to identify the conclusion, but during the falsification question, I tend to focus on the wrong aspect. What do you do about it? This is a symptom. A symptom has a cause in it. If you're focusing on the wrong aspect, then this means that you're not able to visualize either the conclusion or B, the logical structure. Because frankly, if you do both of them, you will not focus on the wrong aspect. Okay. Do we provide admission help? If you have a valid GMAT, guys, put the question in the Q&A pod, which is bottom left-hand corner, because I'm not reading the right-hand side over there anymore. No, we don't provide admissions help, but we can put you in touch with good admission consultants over here. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I look forward to seeing you in the quant workshop tomorrow, and then in the strategy session next weekend. Okay, so let's do that, and let's get you on that path to that 700 level score. Thank you and have a great day.